Welcome everyone to a special installment with our interviews with composers. This installment is in support of our event on Valentine's Day called Love Stories, which will be broadcast on G-Town Radio on Valentine's Day at 4 p.m. And today we have Paul Schuette. Welcome, Paul.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
It's great to have you. Many of in our audience will recognize you from a recent collaboration with Network on a piece called The Navigator, but I'm wondering if you could just introduce yourself briefly.
Yeah. As you said, my name is Paul Schuette, and I'm a composer living and working here in Philadelphia. I teach full-time at the University of the Arts. And yeah, the project, The Navigator, that happened in January 2018 was a really nice opportunity for me and everybody else involved, and one that I look back on fondly. Was my first chance to work with Network, and was really a major collaboration. It was product of my work with a painter friend, Mary Laube, and the fabulous Network musicians, and a big piece for me. It was one that I wrote for an unusual ensemble, which I was happy to work with. We were percussion, piano, violin, cello, and harp, which was fabulous. And 25 minutes of music was paired with what we came to call a kinetic visual art installation that was suspended above the audience, and there were all these motorized parts and lights which coordinated and synced with the music, and was an exciting event for me personally, and I think for all those who were there to see it. And so this is my second chance now to work with Network on a project.
And that piece was produced just before I came on as artistic director. But listening to the Network performances, I was impressed with it, and very much wanted to work with you when I came to Philadelphia. And you said that was a collaboration, and the piece that we've commissioned from you for this event is also a collaboration of sorts, where we've paired you up with a love story, and you created a wonderful piece called "No Storm Can Shake My Inmost Calm." So I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about that collaboration and what attracted you to that particular text.
Sure. Yeah. So every composer involved in this project, as you said, was given a text which was generated by a member of the Germantown community, and mine was unusual in that it came from a pastor at Germantown Mennonite Church who was recounting a story, really giving a sermon about the Germantown Mennonite Church and how they've been cut off from the larger denomination because as a body they've elected to allow queer folks into their membership. And it was a story that I was drawn to because I have a history with the Christian left myself. My father was a UCC, United Church of Christ, minister until he passed away 10 years ago. And so it was the tradition that I grew up in. I knew these scenes. My father had successfully led a congregation through an open and affirming process, as it's called, and was performing gay marriages at the end of his life in a Chicago suburb. And so, yeah, I was drawn to this text for that reason. I felt like I knew these scenes. I knew these stories. I care about them, and it really wasn't maybe until I was 25 years old that I understood that this idea of the Christian left was something that even needed to be qualified. It was just the tradition that I grew up in, and really what I understood Christianity to be, and happy to collaborate with Pastor Amy on this piece.
And I remember on your social media about when the protests and the pandemic was, upon us, and you wrote such thoughtful and insightful responses to that. And I think you evoked your father, the memory of your father in that. So I think
Yeah.
that seemed like a natural connection for you and Pastor Amy to create this piece.
Mm-hmm.
Could you tell
Mm-hmm.
us a little bit about how you worked through it, how you listened to it, and created your composition?
Yeah, as I've alluded to already, I was really given what was a very well formed and structured sermon. And so for me, after I listened to it a few times, the first step was really to cut it down, to kind of choose the bits of text that I thought were meaningful, were the most important, but also allowed the structure to stay intact. And then once I had those, I really just kind of worked around them and developed basically a 3-part musical structure that kind of highlights the emotional contours of the text.
Mm. And was there anything in particular in the text that you sort of transformed or to help inspire some of the musical content?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would even say that I engaged in some good old fashioned examples of text painting, uh, which is an old musical idea in setting text to song.
Could
Uh,
you explain that to our audiences a little bit?
sure, yeah. The idea of text painting is that you're really latching on to, I guess, the literal content in the text and finding uh, musical ways to uh, mimic that action or emotion. So an example might be if a text is talking about, you know, the pitter patter of rain falling outside, that you then find the kind of sonic equivalent to that kind of soundscape as a way to set the text.
Could you
And
give
so,
us an example from your piece,
yeah,
how that
yeah.
operates?
hmm So Pastor Amy sets this narrative about the Germantown Mennonite Church, and uh, against the context of Nathaniel Hawthorne's novel, The Scarlet Letter, and she equates her Scarlet Letters as GMC for Germantown Mennonite Church. These kind of scarlet letters that she carries with her. And there was a bit in the sermon where she sings just a cappella, a very intimate, kind of lovely moment. And my father used to do the same thing in some of his sermons. And I used some software to just kind of and my own ear to figure out exactly what key she was in and what notes she was using, and then really used that information to inform kind of how I approach the piece harmonically. So
Mm.
I created, and this is my example of text painting, I created my own kind of blue note, a note that really stands out in kind of an emotive way against the larger context of the key that she's singing in and that all the other pitches are from, which is a major key, B major.
Mhm.
And the blue note that kind of sings out, rings out on top of this texture in a slightly obtrusive, almost kind of annoyingly present way is a G, a minor sixth in this context of B major. And yeah, so that was my text painting. That okay, here we have this blue note that stands out in this key. This is the Scarlet Letter, and I even take that so far at the end. She describes how the character in the novel would, really embraced her Scarlet Letter and embroidered it, as it was the term that she used. And I tried to do the same thing musically
Mm.
with this G to try to add some yeah, glittery, sparkly consonant sounds around it to kind of put it in a more beautiful context by the end of the piece.
Well, I like the whole aspect that you're using G for Germantown and
Yeah,
sort of
yeah.
making it into on a conceptual level too.
Mm-hmm.
And it also has a sort of kind of an ambient feel to it as well. And I'm wondering, how did you arrive at that? What is the meaning or meaningfulness behind that?
Yeah, I guess I felt that anything too structured that I attempted to try was really not in the service of the text. That there really are these kinds of broad emotional arcs to yeah, her words, and to remain true to that, it really felt like I was doing what I was doing was just attempting to set the text in kind of a traditional way, and to remain true to the text. And so to do that, yeah, I didn't find anything that was more, structural or rhythmically oriented that was appropriate in this kind of free floating, more emotional contours was what felt right to me when married with this text.
And due to the restrictions on gathering, this had to be an electronic digital piece. So I'm wondering, could you tell us a little bit about how you created it? Because you are a technologist who is fluent in all of the technology and software. So could you explain to us what you used and how you created it?
Sure. Yeah, I primarily used Ableton, which is a one of many digital audio workstations available these days. But some folks might be surprised to hear that because Ableton kind of has an association with more uh, EDM, four on the floor style dance music. But I've found that more and more composers interested in electroacoustic music are turning to it as a tool, because it really is a fabulous piece of software and incredibly flexible and powerful, and pushing some of the older players out of the game, perhaps. So I use that primarily working here in the home studio, and most of what you hear on the recording is produced with software instruments and software plugins. However, I did make one recording with a device that I built, a circuit that I made, called an EM microphone, an electromagnetic microphone, which is pretty simple circuit really, but it's a device that allows me to sniff out electromagnetic activity that's flowing through many of the devices in our lives these days. So it's kind of that static layer that's present and really throughout the piece. And maybe another example of text painting there, at least in my mind, I was thinking of that voice as kind of like the Holy Ghost in this whole Christian soup that I've concocted here.
Oh, that's a great idea. I really like that a lot. In that you're asking us to hear the static more in our lives, and to maybe even hear it more meaningfully.
Mm.
And included in that is the sort of embroidered music and the combination of the timbre and texture of Amy Pastor's voice, which you bookend, right? You're using some of her songs at the beginning and end.
Yeah, yeah. I mean that I hope to capture the intimacy of that moment, because in context it really was this beautiful, touching moment, and knew I had to use it, and I knew that I was going to use it at the end. I was a little more reluctant to include it at the beginning, but I think it was the right way to kind of open up a meaningful, more reflective space for her thoughts, really.
Oh, I think it's a wonderful beginning, and it's going to be. I can't wait for our audiences to hear it and to share it with them. Um,
Thank you. Yeah.
this is again the composition "No Storm Can Shake My Inmost Calm" by Paul Schuette. And Paul, because this is a Valentine's Day special, the broadcast is going to happen on Valentine's Day. I can't resist asking you, what are you going to be doing for Valentine's Day?
Oh, yeah. Good question. Uh, yeah, I've been happily married now for just over a year and a half, and we have discussed this. We have not gone to any restaurants really throughout the pandemic. Have not been interested in, sitting in the cubicles on the street and that kind of thing. But we have done a fair amount of takeout, as I know many others have as well. But we were thinking about it, and one thing we haven't sought out yet during the pandemic is sushi. So we're gonna track down some hopefully better than average sushi for our Valentine's Day dinner. That's the plan, anyways. Hope that it makes it feel special. I'm sure it will. I'm sure it will.
Well, I know your composition makes this program special. The program itself is a really special one. So I'm grateful to you for your contribution and looking forward to sharing it with everyone. And thank you, Paul, for joining me today. It's great to have you here.
Thank you, Thomas.